Yes, Joe, it's
Thanks
great
for doing
to
this,
see
man.
you.
I appreciate it.
Well, we were in a film together, so we've been like right next to each other on celluloid.
What film were we in?
That was The Culture High,
Oh, that's right.
Brett Harvey, and it's you, me, Richard Branson, and Snoop Dogg.
Oh, good company.
Yes, right.
Yeah. So you were just saying right before we did the podcast, you were in bed for 15 years.
Yeah, I got sick in 1988. I wasn't able to make it out of that bed until 2003. But Joe, I was absolutely certain I would never make it out of that bed again.
What did you have?
It's called these days, this month. It's called ME/CFS. Up until now, it was just known as chronic fatigue syndrome, CFS. But it's real serious if you get a bad case of it. So I was too weak to talk for 5 years. Too weak to talk.
You didn't talk at all.
Not a bit. I
did you
didn't have the
communicate with
strength
people?
to puff out even a syllable.
Whoa.
I was too weak to have another person in the room with me for 5 years.
You couldn't have a person in the room.
My stress levels were off the charts, and the slightest thing would just the crack. My wife tried to keep me company. So we have this big king-size bed, and she would lay in bed reading a newspaper, and the sound of the page turning went through me like a cannonball, and it just tore me to pieces. And she had to build a separate room in the front of the house and live there because I couldn't tolerate anything.
Did you think it was over?
Yeah, I thought, first of all, something you don't know. You have a sense of humanity and you don't know it. And something like this that wipes out your entire future, every dream you ever had for yourself, robs you of your sense of humanity. And you don't know there is a sense of humanity until it disappears. So it took me 3 years. I had to rebuild a personality from just about scratch.
Wow.
Because the one area I could handle, at least most of the time, was the internet. You know, the internet hit the music industry in 1983, and I had been lusting after it for years because only academics had access to this real high-tech thing. And it took me 3 years to realize that every day I was trying to go up to my front room office and work, and that sitting was draining me of my energy. And since I only had a tiny amount of energy, if I lay there, horizontal, in the bed, my voice would eventually come back. So I had an assistant take 2 computers, because in those days, 2 computers was about half the size, the processing power was half the size of your cell phone. And I had him hook up 2 computers and a Chinese box. Don't let anybody tell you the Chinese don't invent things. They do. And this was a box that allowed me to control both computers from one monitor and one keyboard. So we had the keyboard up on foam bolsters so that I could see it when I was laying perfectly horizontal in bed. So I could still see the keys. And I rebuilt the personality online because I couldn't get any further than to the bathroom and back. That was it.
What do you mean by you rebuilt a personality?
Well, everything I hadn't expected. I mean, I was going to write my first book. And I'm a nerd from science. I got into science at the age of 10. I got into theoretical physics and microbiology. I built my first Boolean algebra machine when I was 12. I co-designed a computer that won science fair awards when I was 12. I was taken to see the head of the graduate physics department at the University of Buffalo and disappeared into his office for an hour. My mother wondered what in the world had happened to me because it was supposed to be a 5-minute courtesy call. We were discussing Big Bang versus steady state theory of the universe for an hour. And when I was 16, I worked at the world's largest cancer research lab, and I came up with the theory of the beginning, middle, and end of the universe, the Big Bagel theory, or the Bloom-Toroidal model, that predicted 38 years in advance dark energy. And then I ended up in the rock and roll business with this background. So when I imagined I was going to write my first book, I was going to leave the rock and roll business behind because my field expedition in rock and roll, I thought as much as I was ever going to learn from it. And I'd worked with Michael Jackson, Prince, Bob Marley, Bette Midler, AC/DC, Aerosmith, Kiss, Queen, Billy Joel, Billy Idol, Paul Simon, Peter Gabriel, David Byrne, people like that.
What caused this disease? Like
nobody knows.
Nobody knows.
Nobody has
no
a clue.
idea of what the. So in the different names, chronic fatigue syndrome, ME, is that what you said?
ME is myalgic encephalomyelitis.
And
it's a more dignified name.
Can they understand it to the point where they could test for it? Do they give you a blood test,
Nope,
or they just...
They can't test for it. They don't know what causes it. There's no... Look, a friend approached me at one point and said, the Duchess of Kent has what you have. Can you write her a letter about how to manage it? So instead of a letter, I wrote 14 or 16 pages or something like that. So when people have this, I send them this pamphlet. It explains how I got out of it, but what worked for me is not necessarily going to work for you or anybody else.
Was it a gradual slipping away of your energy, or was it a quick drop-off?
Not that gradual. It happened on March 10th of 1988.
So March 9th, you're fine. March 10th?
March 9th, I'm fine. March 10th, I'm fine. I fly down to, I think it was Richmond or something like that, to go out to be taken by Jeep 5 hours into the countryside to meet with Linda Womack, that's Sam Cooke's daughter, and her husband, Cecil Womack, who wrote the Rolling Stones' first hit, he and his brother. And they have this big aircraft hangar-sized farm building. It's going to be their home. But right now, they've just had it built. It's empty. It doesn't have heating yet. And it's March 10th. It's still the end of winter. And so we go in past the sheep and into this building, and there's no furniture in there. And I sit there and interview them for 5 hours and find out that there's something called a black coal mining culture, and that gospel came out of those black coal mines. I had no idea that blacks ever got involved in coal mines, much less that that's how gospel culture began. And they drove me 5 hours back to the airport again. I sat there on the plane with my little TRS-100, the very first laptop computer, this little gizmo that ran off of AA batteries, and then I forgot my laptop on the plane. I don't do things like that. Something was a little off. The next day I thought I had a cold. My technique for handling a cold: work your fucking ass off. Walk a minimum of 2.5 miles and do your work. So I worked and powered my way through it. By Tuesday, I was so weak that my staff had to pick me up under the armpits and drag me off to the elevator and throw me in the back of a car service car and ship me out to Park Slope to my brownstone in Brooklyn. I don't know how I even got up the stairs, and it was all downhill basically from there.
For 15 years.
15 friggin' years.
Unbelievable.
Right. But I had gotten halfway through writing my first book. My plan was, okay, I'll do what I've done with all my rock and roll bands. When my book is ready to come out, I'll go do every morning television show, every radio show, every newspaper in the country. I'll stay at hide houses where the sheets are sunny and yellow, and where they make the bed for you. You don't have to make it yourself, and they'll feed you food and stuff like that, and I'll promote my book. That was my vision of my next step in life, my future. Well, if you can't leave your bedroom, that's all gone. That's all gone. And you have to, and I had to walk into my office one day and say, I have no idea of what's happening to me. I could be dying. I have to be out of here in 2 weeks. And I gave the whole thing to my staff, the biggest PR firm in the music industry.
You just gave it to them?
Yeah. And the next day I got a call from a West Coast competitor offering me a lot of money, and I had to say, no, I'm sorry, I gave it to my staff yesterday. So... And I, as I say, had to reinvent myself with what little I had. The books were still of value. My science was still of value. And I had to create a new me online.
Now, when you say create a new you online, and you say create a new personality, what exactly do you mean by that? Like, what was wrong with your old personality?
The old personality couldn't walk anymore. It couldn't talk anymore.
But that was your body.
That was my body, but you have no idea of just how much of your personality is your body and your vocal cords and stuff like that you take for granted are instruments of some internal you. I had to invent an existence, let's put it that way. Online.
And how'd you do that? Like when you say
I got online. First, I can't even remember what came first. But at some point, because I was fact checking my first book, but had to do this all laying there in bed, I got hold of Napoleon Chagnon, who is the anthropologist who chronicled the fierce people, the Yanomama in South America. People who are really, the more people you kill, the more wives you get. It's as simple as that in Yanomamo culture. And I wanted him to read my book, my first book, The Lucifer Principle, A Scientific Expedition into the Forces of History. And he said, look, people are out to destroy my career right now. I can't get involved with anything controversial, but I'm a key member of the Human Behavior and Evolution Society, and you should be a member. Well, he introduced me to a social group in which I could interact as long as I could continue to type.
So this is a message board, or?
It was all done via email.
So just a group of people that you could interact with email.
Yeah, and I've been working on my writing since I was 16 years old. Science is my base, but the book I got at the age of 12 by Albert Einstein, you know, sometimes a book grabs you by the lapels and it feels like the author's writing this directly into your face. And Einstein said, to be a genius, it's not enough to come up with a theory only 7 men in the world can understand. To be a genius, you have to be able to come up with that theory and then express it so clearly that anyone with a high school education and a reasonable degree of intelligence can understand it. So Albert Einstein, my hero, said, schmuck, listen up. You want to be an original scientific thinker? You have to be the best writer you can possibly be. So I've been working on my writing since I was 16 years old. I was late. It took me 4 years to get around to doing it after Einstein gave me the orders. And when I was put on the Human Behavior and Evolutionary Society group, well, I can write my fucking ass off. So people were impressed and they gathered around me, fortunately. Now, admittedly, it's all on a computer screen and it's all via keyboard and there are no living humans in the room anyplace. But it saved my life to be able to do that. And then I founded 2 international scientific groups of my own, and I wrote 3 books, because those were things I could do with that keyboard, as long as I had the strength to do the keyboarding. And I didn't always have the strength to even lift my hands and do that, but I did most of the time.
Now, during this time, were you getting treated? Were doctors giving you...
Doctors don't know a damn thing about this. Eventually, my first wife, who I lost because of this, I lost a 34-year marriage because of the illness, she persuaded a CFS doctor, a doctor who specializes in chronic fatigue syndrome, to come out to my house when he was going to a party in Brooklyn and see me. And the most useful thing that he did was hand me a piece of paper with an email address on it. And he said, this is another one of my patients. She's in Texas. I want you to get in touch with her. And the 2 of us went out like Hansel and Gretel holding hands going into the forest, looking for treatment modalities. We're looking for treatments that might possibly save us from our illness. So when I tell people the stuff I take and they say, okay, who can I get this from? And I send them to my doctor, my old CFS doctor, he says, oh, I don't give those treatments. Well, he gave them to me, but he gave them to me because those were the things that felt like they might work, and he allowed me to try them. And I ended up with every morning I give myself a shot with 3 different things in it, 1/2 cc of magnesium, 1 cc of oxytocin, and about 2 cc's of cyanocobalamin, which is liquid vitamin B12.
So B12, magnesium, and oxytocin.
Oxytocin, the bonding hormone. Oxytocin, the stuff that creates trust in neuroeconomics experiments. Oxytocin, if you're a mother and you've just given birth to a baby, when you put that baby to your left nipple for the very first time, you feel in some cases like you've just taken LSD, because this chemical goes coursing through your body and it's a trip. And it makes you trust everybody in the room and everybody who walks into the room. It's oxytocin. And oxytocin, I've been on oxytocin now for 20 years. And oxytocin, it turns out, also does something else. There's this little experiment called parabiosis. You take an old rat. His brain is aging, his heart is aging, his kidneys are aging. You hook up the circulatory system to the circulatory system of a young rat. And guess what starts happening to the old rat? His brain starts reversing, getting younger. His heart starts getting younger. His kidneys start to get younger. So I'm about to be 75 years old in a month. And I do between 400 and 700 push-ups in the morning, first thing.
That's crazy.
Yeah,
that's a lot.
It's really crazy. But when they tried to figure out what is reversing the aging in the muscles of the rat, the heart of the rat, the brain of the rat, the one ingredient they were able to isolate and then use on other rats to get them to get younger instead of older was oxytocin. So in all probability, the reason I can do between 400 and 700 push-ups in a morning at the age of 74, and when I was 19, the most I could do was 92, and I was working really hard at it, is the oxytocin.
I've never heard of anybody taking that as a supplement.
Well, it showed up. There was a doctor named something like C-Strunk in Texas who was using it on CFS patients, and my friend, the Texas patient of my doctor, found C-Strunk and got his protocol out of him. In other words, exactly what he'd used to treat the problem. And we gave it to my doctor, and he sat on it for 6 months until he could regurgitate it as his own bright idea. Oh. And then he prescribed it for me. And it's done wonders.
Wow.
That and a bunch of other stuff have done absolute wonders.
What are the other things that have worked?
I think gabapentin. Without that, I mean, I was on my way to Moscow. Once I finally got out of bed, I was going to address an international conference of quantum physicists about why everything they know about quantum physics is wrong. And I was fine. I mean, this was my first traveling since I'd gotten out of bed, and it was taking a huge chance because there was a huge chance on throwing me back into bed again. And I flew all the way to Germany and was doing just fine. I was exhilarated that I was doing so well. And then halfway between Germany and Moscow, the CFS symptoms began to come back. And that was scary. And then I reviewed what I was doing, and I realized I'd missed all my afternoon pills. And as soon as I was able, well, we had to find a bed in the infirmary, which is scary at the Moscow airport because there are people walking around with machine guns and military uniforms, and they want to take my passport away in order to allow me to lay on a bed in the infirmary, and so I could be disappeared at any second. But when we finally got to our hotel and opened up my drug roll, I took the gabapentin, and within 15 minutes, the symptoms were gone.
Wow. So have you ever tried to isolate individual ones, remove some of them from the protocol to see if those
I once removed one, amitriptyline. It's an antidepressant. That's what it was originally designed for. And I figured, I don't need this anymore. I'm perfectly healthy. It was a big mistake. I started having these blinding stomach aches, and they went on for months and months and months, until I finally got fed up and started researching on Google, what do you do about stomach aches? Well, guess what one of the primary things you do to stop stomach aches is? Amitriptyline, the very thing I had gone off of. Oh. So I had to go back on it. So it's a whole network, a mesh of supplements, drugs, and lifestyle. I don't sleep the way normal people sleep. I sleep from 4 o'clock in the morning until 8 o'clock in the morning. I get up, I listen to magazines on the Kindle while I'm taking my bath and shaving and all that stuff. I meet with my assistant. I give her her marching orders for the day. I go back to sleep at 11, and I sleep until 3. And then I get up for my second workday. And that's when I do all my writing and all that kind of stuff.
So do you sleep in 4-hour chunks?
Why? 2 4-hour chunks.
You feel like that is better for you?
My body was refusing to do the 8-hour thing. So one of the first symptoms of CFS is insomnia. Okay, now, Joe, if your body is refusing to sleep for 8 hours straight, listen to your body.
Right.
Give it what the hell it wants. And so these are the hours my body demanded. I had been working often until 8 o'clock in the morning from roughly 11 o'clock at night or something like that, and losing track of time, and it was very disorienting. And once I started this 2 periods of sleep a day, my day stabilized. And there's other stuff. I mean, listening to Pandora, you would think, what does that have to do with your illness? Well, I work at a cafe. That's a vital part of things because I'm surrounded by people. And I've slowly built community in this cafe, other workaholic writers like me, a neuroscientist, a novelist, and all kinds of people who just sit there and slave away all day. But I'm listening to Pandora. That gives me a sense of life. For some reason, it's as positive as an elixir would be. And it gives me a sense of control over my environment, and I don't hear the conversations going on around me, so I can really focus on my work. I've written 4 books this way so far in cafes. All of this stuff, walking 5 miles a day in 2 bursts. I mean, there I am going through a meadow in the middle of a park at night. How many New Yorkers do you know who go out and walk through a park in the middle of the night?
Robbers.
Yeah, right. That's what you'd think. But I have the time of my life looking up at the stars out in the middle of the meadow and being where I'm not supposed to be.
Are you not supposed to go through the park at night?
Well, they let you. I have been thrown out 6 times by the police because I've overstepped the boundaries. I've been out there after 1 o'clock, and they do close the place at 1 and throw us all out. But no, in New York lore, unless you're walking a really big dog, you do not go out into parks at night. But you put this whole lifestyle together, and it's not just any individual ingredient that's making me better. I'm happier than I was when I was 19. I'm stronger than I walk a lot more slowly than when I was 19. But in terms of push-ups and other exercises, I'm stronger than I was when I was 19 years old.
That is a crazy journey, Howard.